Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock step onto the stage of the Victoria Lange show. The crowd expects a heartwarming reunion, two beloved Hollywood icons reminiscing about their legendary careers. But Victoria Lange isn't here for nostalgia. She wants tension. She wants confrontation. She wants the truth, the kind no one dares to ask for. As the lights dim and the applause fades, Keanu and Sandra take their seats, smiling, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. Victoria grips her cue cards, her eyes glinting with something far beyond mere journalistic curiosity. This won't be just another friendly Hollywood interview. What starts as a standard sit-down conversation will spiral into something much bigger, a battle of words, emotions, and raw honesty. But as Victoria prepares to push them, to force them into uncomfortable corners, she doesn't realize she's the one about to lose control. Because before this night is over, Keanu and Sandra will say something that will change everything. And no one in that audience will ever forget it. Before we dive into the full story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love Hollywood stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, we have something even bigger coming your way. The studio is electric. Strategic lighting casts a warm glow, making every surface gleam with cinematic perfection. The audience, packed with fans and curious onlookers, murmurs in anticipation, some clutching handmade signs, others transfixed on the grand red curtain that hides the stage. The room hums with excitement, an undercurrent of energy mixing with the soft, precise movements of the production team, like gears in a well-oiled machine. At the center of the stage, a sleek black leather armchair commands attention, the throne of the host. Beside it, two modern chairs wait for tonight's guests, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Above them, a massive screen flashes the show's name in bold, vibrant letters. Everything about this moment has been meticulously designed. A perfect storm of lights, colors, and sound, setting the stage for what's about to unfold. Backstage, Keanu and Sandra stand just moments away from stepping into the spotlight. A quiet exchange of words passes between them, a reassurance, a shared understanding built over years of friendship. Keanu, dressed in his signature understated black suit over a dark t-shirt, radiates quiet intensity, his presence magnetic yet unassuming. Sandra, in an elegant navy blue dress that makes her eyes even more expressive, forces a smile, but there's a subtle tension beneath it. "It's going to be fine," she murmurs, adjusting the hem of her dress. Keanu raises an eyebrow, his head tilting slightly. "You think so?" His voice is soft, almost lost in the hum of the backstage crew. They both know this won't be a simple interview. Victoria Lange is known for her ruthless style, cutthroat, unfiltered, a journalist who thrives on pushing her guests to the edge. And tonight, she's more prepared than ever. On the other side of the curtain, Victoria clutches her cue cards like weapons, her gaze sharp and calculated. Dressed in an impeccably tailored beige suit, she exudes confidence, the kind that unnerves even the most seasoned celebrities. Polarizing, fearless, and relentless, she is a master at unraveling her guests, breaking them down to expose their rawest truths. Her show isn't about comfort, it's about revelations. Tension. Breakdowns. The show's theme music swells. The audience erupts into applause. The game has begun. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Victoria's voice rings out as she spreads her arms, a perfectly rehearsed smile on her lips. "Tonight, we have something truly special for you. Two stars. Two Hollywood legends. Reunited in a conversation you won't forget." The crowd roars with excitement. Some fans hold up signs, "Speed was my childhood," while others simply scream with anticipation. Without further ado, please welcome Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. The red curtain parts, and they step onto the stage. Smiling. Waving. Keanu, as always, gives his signature subtle nod, a quiet, effortless gesture of gratitude. Sandra, ever radiant, blows kisses to the audience. The energy in the room is palpable, the cheers almost deafening. They take their seats, still smiling, as Victoria watches them like a predator studying its prey. Every detail is being cataloged, the way Keanu leans back, maintaining his signature cool, the way Sandra absent-mindedly tucks a strand of hair behind her ear. Small gestures. Subtle signals. Tools she'll use later. The applause fades, replaced by an expectant silence. Victoria smirks, tapping her cue cards on her lap. She casts a slow, deliberate glance between them, her voice smooth yet charged with something unspoken. "Welcome to the show." "Thanks for having us, Victoria," Sandra says smoothly, crossing her legs with effortless grace. "It's great to be here," Keanu adds, his voice calm, measured. Victoria tilts her head slightly, her smile unwavering. "Well, I think we can all agree, it's fantastic to see you two together again. What happens next?" Nobody is prepared for it. Decades of success, challenges, and, of course, a few controversies. Victoria Lang paused, letting the word controversies hang in the air just a little too long. There was something in her tone, something calculated. The audience responded with a mix of nervous laughter and hushed whispers. They could feel it. Something was brewing. On stage, Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance, a split second, almost imperceptible. But Victoria caught it. "But before we get into all of that," she continued, flipping through her cue cards with casual precision, "let's start with something simple." She lifted her eyes, locking onto them both. "What does it mean to be Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock today?" Keanu gave a faint smile, leaning forward slightly. The question sounded innocent, but the intent behind it was clear. This wasn't small talk. This was the beginning of a psychological chess match. Sandra took a breath, steadying herself. Just as she was about to speak, Victoria gripped her cue cards a little tighter, her sharp gaze giving away more than she realized. The audience, still unaware of the storm beneath the surface, cheered enthusiastically. The question still lingered in the air. Keanu, composed as ever, glanced at the crowd before finally answering. "I think it means continuing to be authentic in a world where that can be a challenge." Sandra nodded. "And it means recognizing the journey. We've grown, we've changed, we've learned. But at our core, we're still the same people who started out all those years ago." The audience applauded. A diplomatic but honest answer. Victoria just smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She flipped through her cards almost theatrically. "Interesting." She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough. And then came the first strike. "But did you really have control over your careers?" The studio went silent. No more murmurs. No more polite laughter. Victoria leaned in, her eyes gleaming with something dangerously close to amusement. "Or were you just puppets of Hollywood, taking whatever roles were handed to you, without actually having a choice?" Sandra barely blinked, but there was the slightest hesitation before she concealed it. Keanu didn't move. He just watched Victoria, steadying her, like a grandmaster anticipating the next move. Victoria didn't wait for a response. She pushed forward. "Let's talk about you, Keanu. You were one of the biggest action stars of the 90s. Then, you disappeared. And suddenly, you reemerged with John Wick as if you had never left. Was that your choice? Or was it just luck? What happened in between?" Keanu didn't rush to answer. He knew that one misstep could shift the entire power dynamic of this conversation. "I think, like anyone, I went through phases," he said, his voice calm, measured. "Not everything in life follows a perfect script. Some choices we make. Others are opportunities that come our way. And we decide whether to take them or not." Victoria wasn't satisfied. "So, in other words, sometimes you took roles you didn't really want?" Sandra let out a soft chuckle, but there was a note of caution beneath it. "That happens to every actor. The perfect project doesn't always come at the right time. But every role teaches you something." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "So, Sandra, you've taken roles you hated?" A ripple went through the audience. There was no mistaking the aggressiveness of the question now. Sandra kept her smile, but her eyes sharpened. I've taken roles that, looking back, I might not choose again. But hate? No. Every project I've been a part of has led me here. It's all part of the journey. Victoria leaned back, arms crossed. That sounds like a rehearsed answer. The tension in the studio thickened. Keanu leaned forward slightly, not defensive, not aggressive, but something in his energy had shifted. What exactly were you expecting as an answer, Victoria? The host hesitated. For the first time, she had been caught off guard. She blinked. But just for a second. Then, she recovered, flashing another polished smile. Just a little more honesty, Keanu. He smiled too. But his gaze stayed steady. Honesty doesn't have to be dramatic to be true. A murmur swept through the audience. Keanu had just flipped the script. At least for now. But Victoria Lang was not someone who accepted defeat easily. She adjusted her posture, pulled out a new card, and this time, her expression changed. All right. If we're talking about honesty, let's really get into it. Her eyes flicked to Sandra, gleaming with something new, something sharper. Many say you could have been the greatest actress of your generation. But instead, you played it safe. Romantic comedies. Comfortable roles. Do you regret not taking bigger risks? The air in the studio shifted. This wasn't just about Sandra's career. This was an attack on her legacy. Sandra blinked, just once, and Keanu looked at her. Almost imperceptibly. A crucial moment. And the audience knew, whatever happened next, it was going to be big. Sandra took a deep breath, holding the tension for just a second. That's interesting, she said finally, her voice steady. Because I never saw my career that way. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You didn't? Sandra smiled again, this time, with unexpected ease. People think taking risks only means choosing dark, intense roles. But I chose to make films that brought joy to millions. Isn't that a risk? Creating something pure, something without cynicism? You think that's safe? She let the words settle, her gaze unwavering. I think it's one of the biggest risks an artist can take. A ripple of applause spread through the audience. It was a graceful yet powerful response. Victoria, however, was unfazed. She picked up another cue card, her expression shifting. This time, her target was Keanu. And you, Keanu? Her voice dipped slightly, as if preparing to strike something deeper. Have you ever regretted something you accepted, or something you turned down? Sandra instinctively turned toward him. Keanu didn't answer immediately. There was something about the way Victoria framed the question, something deliberate. She knew something. He took a slow breath. Every choice I've made has led me to this moment. The words seemed simple. But in the silence that followed, they felt anything but. Victoria held his gaze for just a second longer than necessary, as if searching for a crack in his composure. Then, she pressed forward. Even the choices that made you lose something important? This time, the entire studio froze. The tension was no longer just subtext, it was suffocatingly real. Sandra's brows furrowed slightly. She knew exactly what Victoria was doing. And so did Keanu. He took a slow breath, his expression unreadable. Life isn't just about professional choices, Victoria, he said finally, his voice carrying a quiet weight. Sometimes, the decisions we make, or the ones we're forced to make, shape who we are. But that doesn't mean we regret them. Victoria tilted her head, feigning contemplation. So, you've never had regrets? Keanu's jaw tensed, just slightly. The only thing I'd ever regret is living in fear of what could have been. Silence. And then, the audience erupted into applause. For the first time that night, Victoria hesitated. But she wasn't done. She picked up another card, her demeanor shifting it again. Keanu, your life has been marked by public tragedies. You've lost people. You've faced difficult times. And yet, you always appear serene. The public sees you as untouchable. Almost a modern-day monk. Sandra's stomach tightened. She recognized the trap. Victoria wasn't asking a question. She was setting up a moment designed to strip Keanu Reeves of his composure in front of millions. Keanu clasped his hands over his knees, his posture unchanged. He didn't blink. Pain is part of the human experience. Sandra felt a chill. Keanu rarely spoke about his personal life. I'm no different from anyone else, he continued. We all experience loss. What matters isn't the pain itself, but what we do with it. His voice was quiet, unshaken, but the honesty in it made even Victoria pause. For a moment, but only for a moment. Then she turned to Sandra. And this time, she didn't just push, she struck. You've talked about love in so many films. Yet, in real life, you never found someone to truly stay by your side. Why? The audience murmured. The question was cruel. And everyone knew it. Keanu's fingers twitched slightly, an almost imperceptible reaction. He glanced at Sandra, silent support in his eyes. Sandra blinked a few times. Then, she laughed. But it was different. Low. Controlled. Filled with something Victoria hadn't expected. Sandra leaned in just slightly, her voice soft but unwavering. You know, Victoria, there are questions that reveal more about the person asking them than about the one answering. Victoria's confident expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Sandra wasn't done. I did find someone. Silence. Absolute. Sandra rarely spoke about her private life. Someone who loved me exactly as I am. Who made me laugh. Who shared his life with me. Who gave me a family. She paused, her voice steady. And he's gone. The studio felt the weight of those words. Victoria had overplayed her hand. And she knew it. Sandra exhaled, keeping her composure. Brian Randall wasn't just my partner. He was my home. Victoria remained still, but the shift in the air was undeniable. And just because someone isn't physically here anymore, doesn't mean the love disappears. The audience barely breathed. Even the production team, trained to remain detached, was visibly affected. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, with an almost imperceptible gesture, he placed his hand over Sandra's. A silent, powerful moment. No words necessary. Sandra took a deep breath, regaining her composure. I have lived love. And it's still with me. She tilted her head slightly, the barest hint of a knowing smile on her lips. Does that answer your question? The audience erupted. Thunderous applause. And for the first time that night, Victoria Lang had nothing to say. Victoria Lang looked uncomfortable. For the first time that night, she glanced down at her cue cards, realizing she had lost control of the interview. Sandra and Keanu weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were turning the tables. And Victoria knew it. She swallowed hard. If she had any chance left to regain her footing, she needed to use it now. She lifted her eyes. This time, there was no smile. Keanu, there's something you've never spoken about in public. The air in the studio shifted. Something that could change the way everyone here sees you. Keanu said nothing. He just waited. Sandra instinctively straightened in her chair. Something about this felt off. The game wasn't over yet. And Victoria was about to play her final card. The studio was frozen in silence. Victoria leaned forward. Are you ready to finally reveal the truth? The weight of her words settled over the audience like a thick fog. This wasn't just a difficult question. It was a calculated strike. Sandra subtly shifted in her seat, her eyes flickering toward Keanu. She didn't know what was coming next. but she could feel the tension thickening. Keanu, however, remained still, unmoved. "What truth are you referring to, Victoria?" The response was simple, but it shifted the power back into his hands. Now, she had to be the one to make her move. Victoria hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, she looked down at her cue cards, as if carefully weighing her words. "For decades, people have admired your resilience, your kindness, your ability to remain humble in an industry that devours people." A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the personal bombshell they were expecting, but it was just as pointed. Victoria continued, "But many also wonder, how much of that is real? How much of Keanu Reeves is a persona? A carefully crafted image of a man who never loses his temper, who never makes mistakes, who is always the good guy?" Sandra's eyes narrowed slightly. Now, she understood. Victoria wasn't trying to expose a scandal. She was trying to dismantle Keanu's identity. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, he did something no one expected. He smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a nervous one. A quiet, genuine, almost amused smile. "I see." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "So, what's your answer, Keanu?" He exhaled, leaning back slightly in his chair. "If I were playing a character, Victoria, I think I'd be doing a terrible job of it." The audience chuckled, just a little. But the energy in the room had shifted again. Keanu's voice remained calm. "Because the truth is, I'm just a guy." A pause. "A guy who makes mistakes. A guy who has regrets. A guy who has moments of anger, sadness, frustration, just like anyone else." The studio was completely still. "The difference is, I've never felt the need to broadcast those moments to prove I'm human." Sandra felt something swell in her chest, pride, admiration. Keanu turned slightly toward the audience. "I'm not immune to life, Victoria. No one is. But I choose what parts of myself I share with the world. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because some things don't need to be public to be real." A wave of applause surged through the audience. Not polite clapping. Real, genuine respect. Victoria tapped her cue cards against the desk, her lips pressing into a thin line. She had lost this round. Sandra saw the hesitation, and she knew this was her moment to push back. She turned toward Victoria, crossing one leg over the other. "Let me ask you something, Victoria." The host blinked. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. You've built a career on getting people to reveal things they don't want to. You thrive on tension, on pushing buttons. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why? A collective gasp swept through the audience. Victoria Lang had never been on the receiving end of her own tactics. For the first time that night, she looked uncomfortable. "That's not what this is about, Sandra." Sandra tilted her head slightly. "Isn't it?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. And then, Keanu, still impossibly calm, delivered the final blow. "People don't remember us for the roles we play in movies, Victoria." A pause. "They remember us for the role we play in their lives." Silence. Then, thunderous applause. Victoria exhaled, failed. Her fingers tightened around her cue cards. She had lost. Completely. Sandra turned to Keanu, grinning. "That was fun." Keanu chuckled softly. "You have an interesting definition of fun." Victoria, regaining just enough composure, forced a smile. "Well, this has certainly been a revealing conversation." She turned to the cameras, signaling the end of the segment. Keanu Reeves. Sandra Bullock. Two legends. The interview was over. But nobody in that audience would ever forget what they had just witnessed. Still standing. Still inspiring. And as we've seen tonight, still full of surprises. The audience erupted into another standing ovation as the cameras cut. Victoria Lang turned back to Keanu and Sandra. For the first time that night, there was something different in her eyes. Respect. Maybe even admiration. "I have to admit," she said softly, "I didn't expect you two to handle things the way you did." Sandra smirked. "Neither did you, apparently." Victoria let out a breath, almost a laugh. "Touché." Keanu simply nodded, standing up and extending his hand. Victoria hesitated. Then, she shook it. "No hard feelings?" she asked. Keanu's lips curved into a knowing smile. "No expectations." And with that, he and Sandra walked off the stage, leaving behind not just an interview, but a statement. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. Backstage. The interview was over, but Keanu and Sandra weren't in a hurry to leave. They sat in the dressing room, unwinding from the intensity of the conversation. Sandra kicked off her heels, sighing. "Well, that was fun." Keanu smirked. "You have an interesting definition of fun." She laughed, then glanced at him. "I meant what I said, you know. About us being family." Keanu nodded. "Yeah. I know." Sandra smiled. "It's weird, right? How we've known each other forever, but never actually worked together again after Speed." Keanu shrugged. "Except for the lake house." Sandra chuckled. "Or maybe you were just avoiding me." Keanu smirked. "I think you were avoiding me." She laughed, shaking her head. "You know, back then, I had the biggest crush on you." Keanu blinked. "Really?" Sandra grinned. "Yeah. But you never made a move." Keanu tilted his head. "Did you want me to?" She thought about it for a second, then smiled. "Nah. I think we were always meant to be what we are." A pause. "Something better than that." Keanu nodded. "Yeah. We were." A comfortable silence settled between them. Sandra sighed. "I'm glad you were there today." Keanu met her gaze. "Always." Sandra hesitated for just a moment. "You get it, don't you? Loss. Grief. Moving forward." Keanu exhaled. "Yeah. I do." Sandra reached for his hand, giving it a quick squeeze. "Thanks for that." Keanu just nodded. Then, Sandra sat up, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Okay. Enough of this serious talk. Let's do something crazy." Keanu smirked. "Like what?" Sandra tapped her chin. "Let's open a bar." Keanu laughed. "A bar?" Sandra nodded, eyes twinkling. "Yeah. We'll call it the Speed Stop. All drinks come with countdowns. Stressful, but fun." Keanu chuckled. "That sounds like a terrible idea." Sandra grinned. "Exactly. That's why we have to do it." Keanu shook his head, smiling. "You always know how to make things lighter." Sandra nudged him playfully. "That's what best friends do, right?" Keanu's expression softened. "Yeah. That's what best friends do." She stretched her arms, letting out a sigh. "Okay, enough of this. I'm starving." Keanu smirked. "Burgers?" Sandra hooked her arm through his as they walked toward the exit. "Burgers. No cameras. No spotlight. Just two friends. Still standing. Still connected." And in the end, that was all that mattered. The final question. The studio was silent. The interview had taken unexpected turns. But Victoria Lang had one last question to ask. She leaned forward, her expression sharp. Hollywood is always changing. New faces, new stories. The industry moves fast. A pause. Do you ever worry that you're being left behind? The audience tensed. It was a ruthless question. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance. Neither of them looked shaken. Sandra was the first to smirk. "Oh, Victoria, you make it sound like we're dinosaurs." The audience chuckled. But Victoria wasn't backing down. "I'm serious. Careers in Hollywood don't last forever. Do you fear becoming irrelevant?" Keanu leaned forward slightly. "No." Victoria blinked. She hadn't expected such a direct answer. Keanu continued. "Relevance isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about the impact you leave behind. People don't remember actors just for their films. They remember how those films made them feel." Sandra nodded. Hollywood is obsessed with newness. But audiences? They care about connection. And connection doesn't have an expiration date. Victoria steadied them, realizing they weren't shaken by the question at all. "So, you're saying you don't fear being forgotten?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Everyone gets forgotten eventually, Victoria. That's life." Sandra's voice softened, but remained firm. "But if we've told stories that mattered to someone, if we made people feel something, then we were never irrelevant to begin with." Applause. Thunderous applause. Victoria exhaled, setting down her cue cards. She wasn't just impressed. She was changed. She turned to the cameras, delivering the final line of the segment. Keanu Reeves. Sandra Bullock. Maybe Hollywood moves on, but some legacies? Some legacies never fade. Asterisk. The applause swelled. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a small smile. They had never needed validation to know their worth. And they never would. A quiet moment. The interview was over. But its weight still lingered. Keanu and Sandra sat in the quiet dressing room, lost in thought. Sandra finally broke the silence. "That was something." Keanu smirked. "Yeah. You okay?" He nodded. "You?" "Yeah." A moment passed before Sandra spoke again. "Do you ever think about it?" Keanu glanced at her. "Think about what?" "Legacy. What we leave behind." Keanu was quiet for a second. Then he nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes." Sandra sighed. "Do you think it's enough?" Keanu's gaze softened. "More than enough." Sandra steadied him. "How do you know?" Keanu smiled. "Because people don't remember what you did, they remember how you made them feel." Sandra nodded. Then smirked. "So what's next?" Keanu chuckled. "Dinner." Sandra laughed. "I meant in life, dummy." Keanu shrugged. "More stories. More moments. The rest doesn't matter as much." Sandra smiled. "Yeah. That's enough." They stood, arms linked, walking into the night. No cameras. No spotlight. Just two friends. Living.